Hello, I am Daphne Russell, and this is Define This, a space where we reclaim and reimagine the words we think we understand. Every definition we carry was shaped by an experience, tied to a place, wrapped in an emotion, and often handed to us before we ever had the chance to choose for ourselves. Here, we slow down, we ask different questions, and we listen closely, not to what the dictionary says, but to what life has taught us. Each episode begins with one word and one person's lived definition. Thank you for being here. Let us begin. Today we have PJ Temple, and she is going to be talking about, well, let me just do my sentence, define this, and she's going to define authenticity. And before we get going, I just want to say that we met on Instagram or Threads, and I had posted something, and she was like, "Oh, I agree," so sweetly and warmly. And then I was like, I'm doing a podcast. And she's like, yes, I'll be on. And so I just, love that's how we connected. And it was a connection through books, probably is what I said. And I think we connected on a post I had made about books. But here we are today and speaking about authenticity. So I'm super excited. And PJ, tell us, do you want to finish authenticity is first and then tell us who you are, what you have?
Sure. Yes. So I am PJ. Um, and yeah, I'd love to talk about defining authenticity and what it means to me. I am an Indian woman. I'm a poet, a psychologist, a writer of essays and memoir. And so, like, in my journey, even like as a psychologist, we're also studying self naturally, right? And in training, and as we're studying other people and behavior. And I'm also a child of immigrants. And so authenticity has been something that I believe that has been something that is a journey for everybody. But I can only speak for myself and my experience. And I think finding authenticity, um, being asked the question, who are you? And I write a lot about that. Like, when people try to define us and who we authentically are, which is also interesting. But hearing the question, oh, what are you? Or you speak such good English, making assumptions about why you shouldn't be speaking such good English. And oh, you don't have an accent at all. And thinking about the role of being an Indian woman born in America, of having immigrant parents, but also being a woman, being a girl, being a woman, and what the requirements were. I come from a very traditional family where everything is very scripted from a very young age. And I remember hearing at 4 years old that my parents were going to arrange my marriage, and we were at this small dinner party, and all the adults were laughing. They're like, oh, ha, 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 are you ready to get married, and don't you want to get married? And I was like, what is marriage? And so like already grooming for arranged marriage and defining what a girl is, defining what a wife is, defining who I am. And so having to contend with those things, and I think each individual has different ways they're pushing against something in order to create space for authenticity, the rules of society. And so for me, it was about defining, like, who am I? People are like, what are you? I'm like, well, I'm a human, but in addition to that, like, what am I? And that exploration of self. And so I see authenticity as a very personal experience for for each individual, because we're so nuanced. Um, so that is a little bit of that's a little bit of what I have in mind about the idea of authenticity, and how I would define it.
I want to go, you said like 20 things that I wanted to jump on, but I wanted to go, um, actually, you said, something about the journey or something. I'm like, it's the journey. Like we have one journey.
Mm,
It's finding our authentic self, I feel like. I feel like we don't have any other things, just finding us. And then once we find us, we can be, this beacon, not for people to come towards as much as like see and go, oh, me too. And then,
mm,
become. Um, but you said something really interesting that I'm a little bit obsessed about, which is you said your 4 year old, you remember being four, and the parents, the adults around you were talking about you getting married, and you're like, wait, what's marriage? I feel like I have this theory that at 4 or 5 years old, in that little tiny window, that what happens is we are aware and conscious completely. And then someone says something, an adult around us says something, and we either have to buy in to them and get some security and some serenity and some safety, or the opposite, which is very, very, very difficult at four. So then I think our whole struggle, like if let's say we fall into the someone says, you need to be married, and you're like, wait, that doesn't sound right. Um, And they're like, well, and I'm not saying in your family is what happened, but when the child is punished for going, wait, that can't be true. And then they get punished for that. Then they have to decide, wait, do I want to be punished more? How can I do this? How can I navigate the system? And then if they fall into the unconscious system that the parents are presenting, then they're stuck there until later when they have lots of opportunities to break free of that system. And then finally they find, oh, wait, 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 wait. And then they bust out of that unconscious system. I know there's a crazy theory I just threw on you, but you said 4 years old, and I'm obsessed with that 4 or 5 year age group and
Mhm.
something that happens in there. Because then you seem like what is that? There's a word, precocious. Maybe precocious is another word for, hey, I actually am conscious and aware of everything and I'm pointing it out to you people. And so
Mhm.
you don't want me to point it out, so you call me precocious. I don't know. It's just a little theory. But you could talk about anything you want. I just really wanted to share that.
Oh my God. I'm so glad you brought that up because now I have like 20 different
Okay,
things
great.
I'd
Go.
like to say about it.
Yes.
So yes, it's like this like magical box that I too believe happens in those like really formative years before we have more abstract thinking, but we're taking in these like concrete ideas. They're concrete to us until they're not. And then later, as we get older and we have more abstract thinking and we're thinking about things more fluidly and thinking like, oh, marriage, and that means not just like there's a girl and a boy and then you like live in the same house. It's like, oh, as a teenager it's like, oh, I like boys, or for some people I like girls, or like whatever it is, and like oh, like I like this type of person, and like maybe I want to get married, maybe I don't, maybe and you start to define what you want for yourself. And so like coming up against, and I would say, yeah, I was labeled as precocious in the
For
cover
sure.
of having a rebellious spirit because
Yes.
very Christian household, very conservative Christian Indian,
Yeah.
um, converted. My great grandparents were converted to Christianity. So it's like everything that we were and did, again, speaking of authenticity, like our culture, our practices, Hindu practices, everything was like now at this point at conversion was bad and wrong. And you don't speak those things. And but that's part of like who I am, what my ancestors were, right? But in any case, like, so you have all these things that are bad and wrong, and you are born a sinner and you will die a sinner, and you're just always a sinner, and you're always bad, and you have a rebellious spirit. And so like you take all of that and you think about like, yeah, you have like all of these ideas at 4, at 3, at 7, whatever, and developing those into ideas that are actually meaningful, um, or just don't mean much to you personally. Like in my case, breaking out into my sense of authenticity meant like I don't want an arranged marriage, and I don't even want to marry an Indian man. I fell in love with an American man. And so like when that crossroad happened, it's like, where does my authenticity sit? Because for a lot of Indian women, especially, and I mean people in many countries where arranged marriage is the practice and continues to be,
Mhm.
um, it's like, do I? do I follow that tradition to please my parents and to sometimes not be disowned and sometimes in some cases so that I am not, murdered.
Right,
Um,
right, right. There's
yeah,
levels of punishment
yeah,
to you not
right,
getting along with the system. Yeah.
right.
Within your own
Yeah.
family, which is so shocking,
What's that?
Within your own family, there
Within your
could
own
be,
family.
which is so
Right.
shocking.
Right, right. So it's like sometimes it is about safety, and I always have to say that when I talk about, arranged or forced marriages, sometimes it's about safety. But I also had the privilege of saying, I don't want to do that, and I was starting to be disowned for it. Um, but I didn't truly worry that I would be harmed physically.
Yeah.
It was the emotional harm. So you have to choose, like, am I going to be who I authentically want to be? And sadly, I've known people who have sacrificed, the person that they love deeply in order to follow tradition and to please their families. Um, and I've wondered a lot, and I've seen people too in my practice who have really contended with that from different ethnicities, and different backgrounds, different places around the world who have contended with, like, yes, this is a person I love, but I know my family will never accept that person. This is the person I love, but this person's a secret, and I'm gonna go ahead with the arranged marriage because that's what I'm supposed to do. This is the career I'm supposed to have even though I love, I'd love to teach, I'm gonna do law or medicine or whatever.
Right.
So I think defining authenticity can look so different in all of those circumstances. I mean, breaking out and saying, you know what, Jill, like family, I love you, but I'm not gonna follow that path. Like that could appear like the truest authenticity, but also if a person is able to find themselves somehow in an arranged marriage, which I mean, there's a lot going against that if that's not something they truly want to do. But finding your authenticity in like, like, yeah, I had to do this for my family and I care deeply about what they think, but also I'm going to maybe become a visual artist secretly, or I'm going to find these pockets of life that are for me, that are authentically who I am.
Oh,
So,
that's interesting. I like that idea. That maybe you can still generally find who you are, if you buy into not the whole system, but part of it. So you buy into the marriage, but you have this other part of you that becomes. I
mm,
imagine though both that there will be a throwdown
yes,
between the two systems, And you had said earlier the word
absolutely.
crossroads. Just mention the word crossroads. I find the word I'm finding now in my learning curve that words that people say are actually just another word for something else someone else is saying. Like we're kind
Mm,
of people like the way that we're talking and what we're talking about is spoken in different ways. It's just more of like saying crossroads. It's a nice way of saying, where I choose authentic self or family path,
mhm,
authentic self or societal path, authentic self or, and maybe that's just crossroad after crossroad after crossroad after crossroad.
mhm,
And it's just
mhm,
like constantly we're given. That's why when someone says, well, my struggle is harder, I'm like, no, 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 no. Because we
mhm,
all are given crossroads a
yeah,
lot. And I mean, some are dangerous, as we did discuss, some are more dangerous, but we're just talking about, in a general world,
yeah,
in the general non-violent, like just the family shunning. Like, let's just say that's the worst thing, family shunning, right?
mhm,
Um, there's
well,
a lot there, though.
yeah,
A lot of sacrifice to family, to not being authentic, I think, too. A lot of self-sacrifice.
mhm, 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 right, yeah, and yeah, definitely, yeah. You're talking about crossroads, and the meaning of that, even like. definitions on definitions.
right? Right.
But this is why it's such a cool conversation to like pull certain words out and say like, yeah, this can be framed differently. But I think of authenticity in that same way where it is on there's the journey which is ongoing. Then there's all of these different crossroads. And like as humans, absolutely we have multiple different crossroads and it's not like, oh, I'm a woman, so I have more crossroads or more
Right.
difficulties than a man. Like a man has many difficulties too. Systemically, we can talk about that, like as a, as being, yes, there are realities about like gender and race and disability and all of those things, like so many things. And then there's the core of it where in the human experience, that's where we all connect is where we all suffer, we all have pain. And in that pain, we can say, you know what, like I'm really sorry that you're suffering and I've suffered too. And I might not know exactly what your suffering feels like for you, but I know this stuff is hard. Um,
I know what suffering is. Yeah.
I know what suffering is. And
Right.
I think that's one of the most purely authentic places we can be with another person is to say like, yeah, you have your traditions, I have my traditions, you have your views, your political views, like your whatever. But like we're humans and we both must know what suffering is. Like I tell people, you know, I do a lot of trauma work and in that tell people like if we're breathing and we're here right now, like we have experienced some type of trauma or will unfortunately in this life because life is just not without trauma. It's not without pain and suffering. And that sounds so sad and depressing, but it's also not without light and without beauty. And I think that's it's all there, but it is about like sensing that even in terms of I'm veering a little bit to more of the emotional health side of authenticity, but when we think about mindfulness, for instance, it's like, what is mindfulness? It's like people are like, okay, so I sit there and I breathe. And I'm like, yes, and you observe the different thoughts that are coming in, as though they're like little leaves on a river. And you
Yeah.
notice like, oh, like that's a terrible thought. And I hate that memory. And then you have the next thought that comes in. It's like, oh, like kind of hungry right now. And then the next thought is like, oh yeah, I want to catch up on that show. And the next thought is like, oh, it's sad that that person left or, and we're observing mindfully. So we're like, we're we're watching and we're observers of whatever those thoughts and whatever those emotions are in those moments. And that too is a sense of emotional authenticity versus all these offenses that we live by, like suppressing our emotions,
Yeah.
repressing our emotions, denying that we're hurting. Um, so many ways that we might mask the pain, but if we're masking the pain, we're also to a degree masking the joy that we can experience as well. And so authentically observing, not that it's fun to,
No,
to
actually.
recall these things, it hurts and
Right.
it's sad and it's enraging and it's all these things. Um, but also then it allows us to observe like, wow, it's such a beautiful sunny day and the light on trees looks like diamonds, and the birds are singing a particularly beautiful song today or whatever it might be. I think that's like authenticity in the psychological realm, which I can never separate from anything else I'm talking about.
Oh no. That's
You know,
fun though. And I
but
wanted to I want to bring up your river with the leaves though and your thoughts. Because right, you're when you're doing that, you're first of all, you're changing these memories into a thing that's almost tangible, right?
Mm,
Right. So, you're you in the deepest part, just like you're not even mentioning, is that you're showing the person that they're optional thoughts.
yeah, mhm,
Because the river's going by, the leaves are going by, and you're picking one up, like you said, and looking at it like a leaf. So now they're like taking this thought and making it into a leaf.
Mhm.
And you didn't even tell them, hey, we're going to do this imaginary game. But now they are, if they followed your instructions, then they're like, oh, it's a leaf. And then you could even have them turn the leaf over. Oh, look how
Mhm.
it's not the same on either side. So one leaf in your mind, so you can choose either way of that, either side of that thought that you want to have about the death of someone or this interaction you had with someone. You can choose either side of the leaf.
Mhm.
Or you could set the leaf back down and let it keep going. It might come back around, I don't know, and but you're giving them a tool that they don't even like you're not here are the instructions for, right? You're just like guiding them on this way to look at it the same thing differently. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of what I do in my work is allow them to look at books in a way that they hadn't previously because they were however that first book was put in to them, right? Could have been any different way that they had that first memory, right? Wherever that first memory came from. And then how since then it's been that definition of books or reading has been created. I'm
Mhm.
just showing them that like that's not a permanent condition.
Mhm.
And you can
Mhm.
change how you're coming at the same thing that you thought was horrible.
Mhm.
It's the same, it's a memory. It's just coming at the memory slightly differently. And because when you can, I think it allows for your authenticity. Because
Mhm.
those thoughts are controlling you. And once you control them, then you're like, oh, I don't have to feel this way about this
Mhm.
situation. I
Mhm.
can choose to look at the sparkly side. I can choose to manipulate it. I can choose to let it go,
Mhm.
further down the river or whatever. It's just kind of a fun thought with your little
Mhm.
river idea.
Yeah, it's about observing these thoughts go by because we have a thought and that thought might linger for 10 seconds and then we have another thought come in.
Mhm.
That one might be a bigger one. That might be, that might be a scarier one. And we're like, whoa, like I'm going to give that a lot of attention, a lot of meaning. But do we have to give it a lot of
Right?
attention?
You
Like
don't
that,
have to.
don't have to. And, that speaks to anxiety and our like, and I'm like, okay, is that anxiety or is that you? Like pulling apart,
Right.
a lot of the work I do is with obsessive compulsive disorder as well. And with that, you have like these obsessions in the brain saying like, oh yeah, like we have to
Oh, yeah.
focus on that obsessive thought. And then we might follow up with the compulsion to help in that moment to decrease it. But if we're thinking about that authentically, if you're thinking about like the mantra is it's not me, it's OCD. And so it's like, what is you though? And that's the authentic part, like even our emotional function. What is the authentic part of what we feel, what we think? Um, because I say, and kids love this, it's a little gross, but I'm like, thoughts are farts, guys.
Oh,
Like they come and they go, they come and they go, and they're like, ah, they love it.
that's
Um,
funny.
love, love working with kids. Adults love it too. Um, because it's
Yeah, you're
just,
you're changing the meaning of things for them, which is
mhm,
it makes it more so it's more malleable. And they're like,
mhm,
because if they're dead set on this is a computer and this is my thought and I'm going to hold on tight to them and run and you can't stop me. And you're like, well, you could do that,
right, right.
but you could go and just see what happens.
Yeah, because your authentic self is being is drowned out by this thought
Yeah.
that your brain is saying you really, really need to hang on to. But then there's, there are ways to connect back with your authentic self, your authentic feelings and thoughts about this thing. It's a spider and you're terrified because you're afraid of spiders, but we can get you back to your authentic self where you're like, oh, but it's a spider and it's actually not coming for me. And like, I mean, that's a process. It's not that
Yeah, of course.
simplistic, but a person's authentic self as a little baby is not to say, ah, spider. Somehow they learn that that spider is scary. So it's like coming back to our authentic self. But yeah.
I want to ask you a couple. Well, one, I want to tell you this term I learned from this guy named Eddie on LinkedIn is that he calls it when I talked about books, he said that books are neurological representations, basically, of the first book.
Mm,
And that's where I kind of started this more exact way of my method is like, I was like, oh, so I can just help them change that neurological representation of books and shift it over a little bit and
mm,
then make it more accessible very simply, which is so
mm.
crazy. Um, I was wondering if you could say the most vague story with no details of anything that would also give us an idea of like one of the most biggest success stories that you had with somebody finding their authentic self or something that you've figured out that like if they do this one little thing or if they're able to, then that authentic self starts to really show itself. Like just something you've observed in your practice.
Mm. So I think that we move away from our authentic self. One of the fastest ways we move away from our authentic self is when we have the obstacle of trauma, because trauma tells us that life and our sense of self and our sense of safety is something different than what it truly is. Like in that traumatic moment, it could have been that it was a very dangerous, very scary, a very abusive situation, whatever it might have been.
Right.
But then that starts to define a person's life. And so when they're able to start to address their trauma, they're able to start to get a better view of themselves
Mm,
because we operate from a place of trauma when we're terrified,
right.
right? When we can't trust people or places, situations, like that pulls us so far away from who we are. And I know, like, I have, seen like personally, in friendships and family and people I've worked with where like a person almost loses a sense of self because whatever the trauma has been starts to define them. So, thinking of one very vague example, someone who's just contended with trauma throughout her life,
Right.
many levels of trauma and really not ever receiving the opportunity to say, hey, like, who am I? Because trauma causes us to think that, oh, well, I need to behave in a certain way in order to protect myself. I need to be guarded for one. So we're not leaning into relationships because we're like, well, people in the world are not safe. And so that changes us. That changes who we authentically are. It suppresses who we are. And when we think about, childhood trauma, then a child developing this protective sense of self is not moving through their young lives in authenticity. They don't have the freedom to do that. Like I see kids who are nurtured well in comparison to children who are, treated neglectfully or dismissively.
Right.
And the kids that are nurtured well are like they're exploring things and they're like, oh, Mom, it's a dog. And they're running toward the dog. Mom's like, no, no, honey. Like, yes, we have to ask first. And yes, that's a dog. And that's a Wheaten Terrier or whatever, and they're giving information and they're like creating the sense of safety. But then if we have a child who doesn't have that and they're like, get your ass back over here, that dog's gonna bite you, like that is like creating fear. That's creating like, it's a loss of opportunity to engage with this child and to teach this child and to say, hey, yeah, cool dog. Like we should talk to the parents first to the dog's parents and find out if it's okay to pet the dog or and in that way it's like we either like embrace our authenticity or we lose it because of trauma. So I would say that trauma can be such a barrier to knowing who we are, and nurturing can be the conduit.
I have to write that down.
Okay.
Sorry, listeners. because I'm not going to lose that sentence. Okay, that was actually quite perfect, what you just said. Do you
Mm,
even know what you just said? Or is it like you're just like, oh, I'm speaking of my authentic self of everything I've learned? Like, I mean, that right there is like an entire clinic on why how things should go, how things should be. Like, because you're saying that the trauma, our reaction to trauma is defining a person, right?
mm,
So, and they end up suppressing who they are because they are needing to protect themselves. So they can't actually find out who they are because they're in this hyper safety mode, right?
mm, mm,
And then the parents or whoever is, if they create a sense of safety, I'll allow for the authentic self to come out, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
and this all has to happen in order for them to become authentic. So you
mhm,
said that trauma is a barrier to knowing who we are, but nurturing can be the conduit.
mhm,
And I think that goes with what I maybe, we didn't even originally meet on this topic, but um, I'm saying that because a lot of times in schools they talk about, well, in teacher school, they're like the kids' home life. And everyone's like the kids' home life, kids' home life. 100% kids' home life. But you can't tell me about the kids, telling me about the kids' home life is information.
mhm,
But if I start to dwell on it, then I start to create my own beliefs about what that child is potentially capable of. And
mhm,
like that's not true. You can't you can't define a child or anyone else based on their experiences because it depends on what they do with those experiences. So now you have a kid who's been traumatized at home and now they're coming to school. Okay, well, they're two different spaces. So you might have a traumatized child at home, but if you create a safe space at home at school, then it doesn't fix home because home's still traumatic, but it does allow them for a safe space so they can start to find their authentic self, and that's
mm,
so important. So my method is just allowing for that, allowing for the trauma to be recognized. I mean,
mm,
someone yesterday on my Threads account said, I've never seen those two words put in the same sentence. And it was just literacy trauma. He just put,
mm,
I'm like, I know. And the thing is that some adults are passing on their literacy trauma because it seems like
mm.
it's not for them. And then this kid's carrying the literacy trauma to school, but all the teacher has to do is make it not traumatic and then
Yeah.
or even heal it. It doesn't even matter. There's a lot of blaming in schools too, like the seventh grade teachers saying, well, if
Mm,
the first grade teachers tried. But knowing how to provide the opportunity for someone to find their authentic self, that's not in teaching 101. That's like
mhm,
in practice, 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 practice. Like I
mm.
don't know how old you are, but how long did it take you to realize you're providing the opportunity for the authentic self to come out? Like how many years of practice did you have to go through to realize what your real key is of helping people see their authentic self and become theirs? How long did that take you?
It's it's definitely a perpetual movement throughout life, I think, to
Right.
find like all the ways that we are authentic and like even like who we are. Um, and it's those, so like it's a different journey for everyone. And I always talk about like because as humans, we tend to compare ourselves and like people are like, oh, well, I'm behind in terms of being authentic, or I'm behind in terms of like schooling or whatever. I
Right.
should know
Right.
this, or I should be a published author of 10 books. And I'm a writer, so I read a lot about people
Yeah.
feeling behind and feeling, and I get it. Like that's just realistically what we do, but we're not like doing like we're not on a racetrack with people like
Right.
we're on a beautiful path in the forest all by ourselves, just, hearing the ground crunch under our feet and looking around and observing the sun or the rain coming through the trees and like oh little deer family and a doe and and we're on this journey of like where am I, and this comes back to mindfulness again, like where am I in this moment, you know this exact moment in my life, like I'm here with lovely Daphne having this conversation, and we're exploring. And it's like, that's where I am in the journey right now. And like, if we look at it in a wider sense of like, well, if in your mind you're like, yes, but like, where the heck are you in terms of your authenticity or the course of your life? I feel I feel that like when we talk about Crossroads, I think that moment for me was pivotal when I was 18. I met the love of my life and I had to keep him a secret for 2 years.
And,
Um, and then I'm like, and then I got pregnant and my parents are arranging my wedding. And they're looking,
wait. You're pregnant with someone else. Yeah,
yes,
baby.
yeah.
And during the exact same time, you're, wow, way to go hard on the crossroad. Continue.
That's hilarious, right? I was like, I'm going to do the exact opposite of what my Indian Christian conservative
Yeah,
traditional family wants me to do.
we're gonna go really well.
I didn't plan it. I didn't plan it, right? It just happened. But I think that's when I was like, okay, I really need to like do inventory of who I am as a person because like everything my parents said I should be most things, not all things, but a lot of things that they said I should be, was the person that I wasn't.
Mm,
And and so I knew that there was like deep disappointment for them in that. They wanted me to be a medical doctor. I'm like, well, I'm gonna be a psychological doctor. I'm gonna, and like we make these decisions. And again, there's some level of freedom and privilege to do this because like in my heart of hearts, I knew that. Well, I didn't know at that moment, but I think I did know that they wouldn't completely reject me. They wouldn't disown me. They threatened to. So like there was some question about it, but I had the privilege of knowing that like ultimately they're probably gonna end up like continuing to love me, you
right,
know. But that was the crossroads there. I think that was a crossroads that like kind of like was pivotal to the other times in life where I said, like, what, well, who am I authentically,
right.
in this context and this context and, in terms of my spiritual belief system,
Mhm.
uh, in terms of, so many things, like so many decisions in life that we make and like, who are we doing this for? And I know many people in traditional cultures and households who are well into their 50s and 60s, um, having lived for their parents and for their community and for their culture. And I hear this from people reaching out on social media or, through my work or through the stories I share or my books, where people are hitting me up and they're like, wait, like, how did you make that decision to go that route and like, like say like, well, okay, hell, I'm pregnant and like it's a sin and I'm a sinner and and like do that anyway. Like how did you do that? And like what was that like for you when your parents had this whole other life? Because there are people who will follow their parents' requirements to a T,
Right,
and then they're looking back and they're saying, well, damn, like I wish I had done it differently. I
right,
wish I didn't care so much. But it's not their fault either. It's that they were told. It goes back to what you said about that 4-year-old, and it's that like Pandora's box, I guess, that opens up at some point where we're like, oh, like, how do I give this information meaning that I'm supposed to get married?
right,
And it's like, if that's what I'm supposed to do, well, that's what I'm gonna do because if not, my parents are gonna be disappointed, hurt. They're gonna be angry. They're gonna, whatever. And so, like, I think that is, and there's so many other factors. There's like personality. There's, I mean, like there was like some level of recklessness with me where I
maybe.
think it's like, and even before that, like big decision, I think like prior to that, it was like, no, you can't do that. And I was like, I will do that. I don't know why I'm this way, but there's some really compliant, really sweet kids who are like, okay, mom and dad, like, yes, I'll do that. And like, you know, but then like each one of us has that desire to connect with our authentic self at some point in our lives.
Oh, I
So,
like that desire to connect with our authentic self. I really like that. Do you say that a lot? Or did you just make that sentence like right now, just like, I don't know. I think
oh,
that's like really beautiful because
thank
we talk about all the connections, and I'm always talking about reading and how the kids are taught to read that way. Like answer the teacher's questions, get the answer right over there, that one on the board, that one in
mm,
the book, you know. And I'm always like, if we can train, not train, train's probably is training, but I mean, like, you know, provide the idea that we're
mm,
reading this way. And I just keep saying this way. But I might steal your little sentence there, but desire to connect to our authentic self is like, because if we don't let that desire flourish, then we're pushing it away.
mm,
And
mm,
and sometimes I have students that don't want to read this way because they're afraid of going this way.
mm,
And they're actually the hardest ones to help it
mm,
because they don't want to see what's inside.
yeah.
And I have to help them believe that what's inside of them is beautiful.
Mm.
So it's like has nothing to do with reading. That's why it's so funny when I post things. I'm like, you guys, you actually don't know what I just said. What I was saying. It's okay. But
And it has everything to do with, it's like the inquiry into self. It's like looking at the depths of self, something that sometimes they're not able to do in
yeah,
other environments. And so, yeah, my second grade teacher, Miss Swicklick, I loved her deeply because she was the first person who was like, you get to explore that story. And like, guess what I was strongest at? I loved reading. I loved writing because Miss Swicklick, because like, yes, there was stuff at home where I wasn't always able to explore. But what you said earlier about like, yeah, a child it can hold tremendous trauma. And of course, it comes into the class, it follows them wherever they go. But can you create an opening where you're like, hey, I really care about your story. I really care about what you care about. I really care to hear who you are. And I think when I'll have people write letters to their younger selves
oh, nice. Yeah.
and it's like this trending on TikTok and all of that. And like, but like that hits people. It became a trend because when we think about that, like younger little Daphne who might have wanted to explore something, know something, see something, or wanted a hug in a certain moment, or, oh, Patty fell off her bike, and her parents are like, why are you so clumsy? Instead of like, oh, like,
Right.
let's see how your knee looks and like it'll be okay. And whatever those moments were, it's like it it allows a child to be who they are in that moment and say, yeah, like this really hurts,
Right.
not suppressing it and be like, I'm fine. And inside they just have so much pain. And so I think like what you said was so beautiful about that because like, yeah, I'm one of those kids who like would go to school and look forward to seeing Miss Swicklick and like, like all the cool, nice things she would say and tell me all the wonderful things I'm able to do, you know.
She's cute. I love her. I have this fantasy that I want to go in a van and go to place where the underrated teacher is like we explore, we find Miss Swicklick, we're like, hey, do you know you did this? And they're like, and they're probably just like, well, I just do that every day. You're like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not done every day. Um, did you say you made it trending on t TikTok or it was
No,
trending?
no, no. No, it started trending on TikTok, but it's like
Oh,
something that I think a lot of, therapists have been doing. Um,
I want to tell you what I do. You're gonna
yes,
love this.
yes.
So I learned this from Oprah.
Uh-huh.
It was on Oprah with a doctor, I don't know his name, and he's passed. And he sent the whole group, the whole crowd, and Oprah back to their younger self,
Mm.
up their younger self, and take them out of the space. So
Take
I
them, right?
take them out of the space and
Oh,
take them with.
oh, wow.
And I was like, and I was watching it while I was kind of inundated with a large group of people that I noticed had probably had school and literacy and/or math trauma.
Mm,
So I was talking to somebody who had literacy trauma, and I was like, I don't know if this is going to work, but he was like a 60-year-old man, and I'm like, I really think you ought to go back and pick up little Kenny. He's
mm,
like, oh. So I sent him, and so I do it with people. It's going to be in my stand store with my class, like the stuff that I'm giving, that you go back and you're with that little Kenny, and his name was Ken, in the room, and you say, hey buddy, I'm here for you.
mm,
And then they're like, oh, you're like, so you can stay here,
mm,
but I can take you with me if you want to go. And like really
mm.
just asking that little Kenny if he wanted to leave. And
Uh,
look around. Is there anything you want to pick up? Is there a poster? Is there a picture that you drew,
mm,
And do you want to say anything to the teacher? Because she did do the best she could.
mm.
Like you could, I say sometimes I say flip them off if you want. But I mean, it just carries the flip off with you into the next. So if you can just forgive them, it really works best. And, forgive yourself for listening to her if she did harm you and like believing those things about you. And you can just, if little Kenny wants to go, you can pick him up, you can hold him
Mm,
with your hand, you can put him on your shoulders, and then you just walk out. And then I describe, walking out of the room
mhm,
and walking down and you can't pick up another kid. If there's another kid that's there that needs to be picked up, because a lot of us are tied to those
mm,
children with us in the classrooms that maybe we saw harm on them. I saw harm on one of my classmates who peed his pants.
mm.
Like if I go back to that third grade classroom, I'm going to go get him while I'm at it. And so, yeah, because she wouldn't let him go. Such anyway, but I did it just one time with this guy because I'm like, I think that's what you need to do if you want.
Mhm,
And sure enough, next time I talked to him, he's like, I did.
mm.
He was really glad I was there,
Wow.
and now he's with me. So
Mm,
I just like I haven't trended that on TikTok, but I mean I stole it from Oprah, and now I can do it with literacy. Like,
mm.
eventually I'm going to figure out math, and it's the same. It's just like going back and healing that little part that's not. You just pick that little leaf up and
Yeah,
cool, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Math
So
is another just
that's
huge
like
one.
next level.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an Oprah replay from like 1990 on Instagram. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm going to try.
Wow.
And it just pulled me in. And I'm like,
Yeah.
adults I
Yeah.
can send an adult back. I can send a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old back, but sending back a grown man to pick
Mm.
up a 6-year-old, 5-year-old.
Wow. Oh, I love that. I love that because like how often do we like go back and talk to that child who's back there, but really like they're just
Yeah.
still so deeply embedded and like we can see it and I see it in myself, I see it in other people when we're like when that little girl comes out, when their little boy comes out and is like playing out that moment from their child self.
Right.
Even if it's like supposed to be an adult moment, they are so raw and so hurt or something has like hit them so deeply that they can't help but even like sometimes people will change the tone of how they speak, the
Oh,
pitch of how they
mhm.
speak, and like we become that child again. And so to go back and say, hey buddy, you wanna come with me? Like that's cool.
Isn't it cool?
Yeah.
And you have to ask. I recognize, I don't even know if he said this, but I know from my work, you have to ask. Because if little Kenny
Mm.
wasn't ready, you just go back the next day.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Eventually,
not
you're going to wear that little guy down. He's gonna like,
right.
fine, I'll go with you. But if you take him out and you know, prematurely, he's just
Mm,
not ready.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I just like that has really helped me help more people.
Mm,
And so I'm
hmm.
going to include it in my because I'm
Yeah.
trying to put together a series of videos that you can go on Stand Store give it to a friend, buy it for yourself, press send, and
Mm,
press purchase, which is not going to be an obscene amount, and like go through the steps and heal your literacy trauma.
yeah. Oh, I love it. I
Yeah.
love it so much.
You-
Yeah, like
Oh,
I was
sorry.
on this I, I was on um another podcast, Stories by Anamika, where she asked people to tell different stories. And we were talking about, my story, and I was like, I don't know, like I could, tell whatever story. She's like, well, you're a therapist. She's like, what's a letter you would write to your younger self? I was like, ooh, that's really good. And
Oh,
it's like, I mean, yeah, I cried. I cried like a baby,
yeah.
because you go back and it's like, as much as I ask other people to do that, it's like, you know, therapist is the worst patient.
Oh, I'm
Um,
sure you guys are.
so I'm like, what passed? But I talk about it. I can talk about it in a very logical sense, but the emotional going back, it's like a lot of us can talk about our past in a logical way.
Right.
Uh, but that going back and like from an emotional place, from a trauma literacy place, like literacy trauma, sorry.
Yeah, no, no.
I think that like is such a cool thing because I can give you, if you're like, drop and give me 5 examples of how you were traumatized around reading or school,
Right.
classroom,
Yeah, school
math,
too, of course, right, right. You know,
performance,
yeah, tying their intellect to
hmm
a 10-year-old moment. Okay, that's not real. There's no way. And like I've done that with a 43-year-old. Same thing. She thought she was dumb and she had all this evidence to prove she was dumb and other
hmm
kids were smarter. And I'm like, well, was that really evidence? And then
hmm
she's like, wait a second. That wasn't actual evidence. I'm like, no, it wasn't. And
hmm
here's an opportunity to see yourself differently.
Oh,
But that going back, yeah, it's
mhm.
hard. But I'm glad that I know this so I can share it. I'm just so grateful.
Yeah,
That's how I
yeah,
feel.
very cool.
Yeah, I don't want to cut you off, but I think that people are gonna uh it's almost an hour we've been talking and we just
Mhm.
so I think that we'll probably have to redo this one again. Like do another one, because
Sure.
I get some of these going, but like we could probably talk for a very long time.
Yeah, yeah, we can.
It's really,
I
yeah.
sense that too. I'm like, oh yeah, we can. A lot to say about authenticity in so many different realms. But yeah, thank you so much. It's really wonderful speaking with you. And I love what you do. And I love just the common threads, just thinking about trauma, literacy trauma, authenticity of self in, coping with trauma.
Right.
Um,
And if someone believes that they're dumb, they can't be their authentic self.
right.
And then if they have proof they're dumb, then they really can't. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's not real.
Yeah.
None of that is real. It's not. You might have evidence, but it's kind of faulty evidence. So let's try some new evidence, and then I give them opportunity for some new evidence, and they're like, wait, I was wrong. Like, yeah,
hmm
that's okay though.
Right.
But I don't want to cut you off from anything. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Is there anything that um did I happen to cut you off or anything? Or you seem
No,
you
no.
seem kind of overwhelmed. Are you now thinking about how cool that new adventure would be, sending people back, right?
No, not overwhelmed. I'm just it's so great to talk about this in this exploratory way. And I was actually thinking about like what you said um uh about like how we speak to ourselves and out of our trauma and like, oh, I'm dumb, or I can't do this, I don't read well, or I don't know how to do math well, or never been good at blank, all this messaging that we tend to believe, and then we gather data
Hmm.
that is biased,
To prove our point.
toward what we believe.
Right.
um and so it's confirmation bias. It's,
I know, on ourselves.
yeah, yeah,
Nobody talks about that. They're always confirmation bias over there. Like, no, confirmation bias here.
right, right. Yeah. And yeah, and it can develop, on both ends, but it's like when a kid is, they've heard that message so many times, it's like, oh yeah, I'm not good at math, my mom said, or my teacher said, or my whoever said, right? Like, or because I'm a girl, you know.
100%. Right. Because
So,
I'm whatever. Well, I fit this perfect category that makes it so I actually can't, And
yeah,
it's like none of it's true. None of those things are true.
right,
Yeah.
right.
God, this was fun.
Yes, it was. You were doing such cool work.
Oh,
Wow.
you're so sweet. I appreciate that. Well, let's wrap this up for the people. Okay, everyone,
Yep.
let me just read my final sentence and then I'm still gonna talk to PJ. Okay, so thank you for listening to Define This. I'm Daphne Russell, the self-proclaimed education evolutionist, talking about teaching and learning and all that in between. I hope today's conversation stirred something in you, maybe a memory, maybe a shift, or even a quiet redefinition of your own, because the words we carry matter, and when we broaden what they mean to us, we change what's possible for us. In this episode, if this episode moved you, share it with someone who might be ready to revisit a word they thought they understood. And thank you, PJ Temple, for
Thank
believing in
you,
me.
Daphne.
Thank you.
Amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was fun.